So, welcome to our kickoff of a new series at the University of Kentucky, sponsored by the Office of Work, Life, and Benefits. We're going to be talking about fatherhood and just how fatherhood is super important in the lives of our children, and that all fathers are on a journey. And their journey not only impacts themselves, but it also impacts their children and their entire family. And so today we're kicking it off with our first part of this four-part series. We will have two workshops in the fall semester and two workshops in the spring. And we invite you to attend all of the workshops. So, kicking it off for us today, Dr. Nathan Wood, and he's going to be talking about emotions and the fact that they really do have a logic to them. Thank you so much, Dr. Wood.
Great. Thank you, Zed, and Work Life for inviting me to do this. And it is a topic near and dear to my heart. If for no other reason, I'm a dad as well. So I do want to shout out a couple of our special guests, and I'm not going to put him too much on the spot. Dr. David Weisenhorn is also on this meeting today, and he is I'm going to get the title wrong, David, like extension specialist on fatherhood. And so he's actually a really great resource as well. So I'm glad he's here. So let me just do a really quick intro to me. So those of you that may not know me, or which is fine, no one really should. Um, so I grew up in southern Idaho, right about where the cross on the A is, South Central Idaho, and literally more cows than people in my hometown. And went to a small high school. Like my graduating class was like 85 students, and so that's very much formative part of my life. Um, This is an older picture, actually. So my wife and myself in the middle, our son right next to myself, and then our two daughters are on the end, and our son-in-laws. This picture is a little bit dated because there's three grandchildren now. So, but a big part of my identity and my value system is very much my family. And the other important part is I love the outdoors, and especially fishing, just hanging out on the water. The kayaks, those are my distraction. I made all of those. So that's just a fun side hobby. My wife's told me, though, I'm cut off. Like, we don't have any more space to store them. I'm not allowed to build anymore. So we'll we'll get there. I gotta create some more space. So professionally, um, I attended my bachelor's degree in Utah State University. I originally started off in mechanical and aerospace engineering. I wanted to design airplanes. Long story short, I ended up graduating in a bachelor's degree in psychology, um, and minor in sociology. Did my master's and doctorate work at Brigham Young University, in marriage and family therapy. So I'm an AMFT, stands for the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. I'm a clinical fellow, approved supervisor, and currently here at UK, I'm an associate professor in the Department of Family Sciences and the director of the Individual Relational Financial Therapy Clinic here on campus. That is our on-site clinic for all of our master students who are working to get their education and clinical training required so they too can become licensed marriage and family therapists in the future. Some of you may have known the clinic by its former name, the UK Family Center. So we thought it was time to update and change the brand a little bit so people actually knew what we do as part of the name of the clinic. So why, when Azette approached me to talk about this, again, it's a topic I'm passionate about, and I see a lot of in the therapy side of things and supervision and in my own clinical work. One of the things I see, probably the number one thing I see that just freaks guys out, in the therapy room is emotion. It's like, I'm not going to overgeneralize. I'm just going to say a lot of men um, struggle with, okay, this emotion thing. I was growing up. When I grew up, I was just, suck it up, rub some dirt in it, like almost like, you know, John Wayne-esque kind of prototype of, the strong cowboy who doesn't get emotional kind of like socialization. At least maybe that's my Southern Idaho sneaking up or sneaking out on me. But I'm pretty sure I'm not alone for a lot of men. It's like when our kids or our partners, that emotion starts to come up in them. It kind of like, how does this make sense? What do I do? It's kind of like sometimes like, oh, especially if it's a child, it's like, okay, they're a bomb. I'm pretty sure they're going to explode if I don't do something. And then when I tell guys, there is a logic to emotions, I promise. Um, they're like, they look at me and say, nah, no, no, don't believe it. And I'm like, okay, just hang in there with me. So that's my goal today is if I can help everyone here kind of understand what the literal logic of emotion is. It'll help us, especially as fathers, like say, okay, how do I understand my own emotions better so I can help kids understand their emotions better, and it may actually help with my relationship too. So I'm going to make a quick distinction here, though. My one of my goals today is to help not only understand logically what emotions and how the emotions work, but to become better at feeling, not necessarily to feel, not to feel better. And it's definitely important to help as a dad. How do we help our children, our child or children, be better at feeling? Um, so the roles of thoughts and feelings are pretty straightforward. I really like this quote because I think it changes our relationship to what our emotions are and what they do for us. So those I love this quote. Those who have suffered are especially advantaged because they know what it means to be human. So that emotions they give us a ton of information, and more importantly, it helps connect us. It's one of the most human things that we experience, and it's through emotions that we connect not only to ourselves but to each other. And another element along these same lines is if we start thinking about thoughts, but also feelings and emotions, they are something that we have, they're not who we are. Again, frequently, if I'm having a conversation with my students about like identity and all that kind of thing, I usually just say I'm innate. Like my roles, um, status, all of that is fluid. It changes over the years, and so I'm just innate. And these thoughts and feelings are things that I experience, but they are not defining my absolute core identity. So that's just some philosophical things here up front. All right. So here's the one of the official definitions. I highlighted some of these different just to pull out some information. So I'm going to do the no presentation. I'm just going to read the slides. So emotions consist of neural circuits that are at least partially dedicated response systems and feeling state slash processes that motivates and organizes cognition and action. Emotion also provides information to the person experiencing it and may include antecedent cognitive appraisals and ongoing cognition, including an interpretation of its feeling state expressions and so blah, 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 blah. So I told you logic is like there's a logic to emotion, and then you get into the professional study of emotion, and this is what I feel like. It's like, oh, hey, it's complicated. Um, yeah, it doesn't have to be. I think there's a lot of good intent out there into communicating like this whole emotion thing, and I'm gonna, and yet it just ends up being more complicated at the end of it. So I'm gonna still try to keep it keep it simple because emotions really are just that. They are the logic to them are quite simple. So to get into this a little bit more, so we're going to get into kind of like what are all the elements that are going on, um, and here's the simple part. There's there's only a handful of universal emotions. So universal emotions is referring to the fact that every, regardless of race, culture, ethnicity, um, level of education, every culture across the world will recognize these basic seven: anger, contempt, disgust, enjoyment, fear, sadness, and surprise. Even newborn infants, 1, 2, 3 week old kids will have many of these facial expressions and these universal emotions. So you can look at feeling wheels and all these other things to increase our vocabulary, which is helpful. Um, but at the same time, it all just boils down to really kind of like we could almost call these families of emotion. So you have a lot of different synonyms for like sadness, like other words that communicate varying degrees of fear and so on. So it's, if we can just remember, okay, there's these basic ones, we're already on to a good start. And I want to share with you all this website. So if you want to go get more, uh-oh, back up, sorry. That link is not live, so hold on, let me. We'll hop there really quick. Um, so a little bit of background behind this website. This website was co-created by Paul Ekman's group. So he's a researcher specializing in emotions. It's actually those universal emotions screenshot is actually from his website. He and the Dalai Lama actually so Ekman and the Dalai Lama worked together to create this amazing website. So here's this six, surprise is not on here, but the six emotions. So you could just click on one emotion. So let's go to men's, one of our defaults. But we can go into anger, and here's a bunch of different words. So if you're looking to increase your emotional vocabulary, this is a great site you can go to and find that. So along the bottom we have our intensity. So fury obviously is the most intense. Annoyance is the least intense. And there's some variation in there. You have to fear. See variation here. Let's go to enjoyment, ecstasy, pleasure. On one side, pleasure, rejoicing. Peace, pride, wonder. All of these kind of are part of that enjoyment family. And I will say, increasing your emotional vocabulary is a really, really helpful tool. Um, Oftentimes, women are socialized to be more relational. Men, we tend to be more socialized, what the science would call instrumental socialization, meaning we we tend to relate to one another, or we tend to judge our value by what we can do, whereas women generally are the sense of value or sense of groundedness is the quality of the relationships. And feeling words are very much helpful in managing and communicating and maintaining quality relationships. And so in my clinical experience and supervision experience, I see that when men can increase their emotional vocabulary, things run a little bit smoother. And as we get into it here in a little bit, the whole experience of feeling is actually can be quite complex. And so these little kids, being able to help them have some words to describe what they're feeling goes a long ways um, to diffusing what, again, feels like, okay, this kid's going to explode. I don't know what to do. Um, and increasing our vocabulary can help them increase their vocabulary. So let me hop back into our presentation here. So all of this stuff is happening when there's a emotion. So there's a physiological process, there's an automatic mental process, and an intentional mental process. And so we're going to kind of break each of those down a little bit here. So in terms of physiology, you can have lots of components of emotions, or physiologically, our body's going to give us information. So like changes in heart rate, changes in breathing, sweat, especially like it's called the galvanic skin response, like your palm sweating. Like right now, because I'm presenting, yeah, there's a little bit of not hopefully flop sweat, but some palm sweat. We got some muscle tension. You have muscle, sometimes shoulders, the jaw tense, the like a fist or the forearms or thighs, like the muscle tension, again, can be part of it. And then facial expressions. So just as a fun aside, if you want to do an experiment about the role of facial expressions in emotion, it can work both ways, meaning that if you're having a good day and you actually put on or try to make your face look sad, you could take a couple seconds and try this. Make that sad face, and you'll notice potentially some physiological changes happening. Like so your mood, which is another word for emotions, your mood will start to like drop too. Um, and it can work the opposite direction. So if you're feeling kind of down, like literally trying to literally put on a smiling face, like trying to be sincere about it, can actually elevate your mood because there's this neurological connection with our something as simple as a facial expression. So all of this is going on in terms of the physiological responses. Now we have this other part, is automatic mental processes. So these are processes that are just that, they're automatic, they're quick, they tend to happen beyond our awareness, so our conscious awareness. So it's just these are what you almost might call intuition is oftentimes what it feels like. Their automatic mental processes are very efficient from a cognitive perspective. So it can feel like intuition, reflexive. The challenging part about these automatic mental processes, sometimes they're called type 1 or level 1 processing, and they can be prone to error. The automatic mental processes, these are built over experience and over time. And so things we watch, experiences we directly have had with other people, that all affect this type 1 processing. So if you've ever heard terms like unconscious bias, this is actually what they're talking about. Where these experiences can lead us to these quick responses based on how we grew up and what we've been exposed to. And so what happens is what others may see, and this is what you might see with kids, when you only have a physiological response and your automatic mental process, so your mental process, the automatic side is taking into account the context, what's going on around us physically. It's going to take into account the physiological information, and it's going to come to a really quick judgment and what others may actually see when this happens. So without an effort for mental processing happening, it's just automatic and physiologically based. We see the reactivity. Um, it just boom. You'll see this big quick response. It oftentimes feels like it comes out of nowhere, and it's just a normal element that happens um, for all of us. So we have the physiological response, the automatic mental process, and then we have this effortful mental process we'll get to here in a little bit that happens. But kids, especially younger children, the effortful mental processes that slow down reactivity aren't really developed yet. And so we see this reactivity and we're like, oh, what the heck? So one of the jobs, one of our positions as a parent is almost to be kind of like the effortful mental processing outside of the kid's body. That our role as parents is to help them slow down the automatic processes. It balances it out. Okay, so it is also the reactivity is found in all ages, adults as well. Just trust me, I've seen hundreds of sessions of couples therapy. I can attest there's emotional reactivity even in adults. But especially reactivity is more prone when we're scared, hurt, hungry, lonely, tired, and if there's a significant history of attachment injury or trauma history, um, like a lot of reactivity, for example, PTSD is a good example. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a good example of emotional reactivity. That's just it's part of the automatic processing. That physiological response is just working overtime. But that's a story for another day. So here's where the logic really comes in handy. So there's primary emotions and there's secondary emotions. We have our basic emotions we talked about, the six. There's, for most people, especially once we get into older childhood and adolescence and definitely adults, when we have a deep feeling, so like a primary emotion, like hurt, fear, love, joy, sometimes, especially if it's a hurt or a fear, we'll put on a protective shield. So I'm feeling, let's say, hurt, some kind of hurt or some kind of fear. And what other people may see is a fight, flight, freeze, or numb response. With kids, especially, I can, we'll make a bold claim here. If you see kids doing one of these four things, especially the fight or flight or freeze, so the deer in the headlight, they just kind of stare, I can almost guarantee you they are they're hurt, like emotionally maybe hurting a little bit, or they're afraid. And it's literally that simple. So when you see a fight, flight, freeze response with kids, rather than responding to that, if you lean into it, we'll talk about that in a little bit, we can get into, okay, they're likely hurt or afraid, and it's really that simple. And FYI, also true in relationships, our adult relationships. If your partner is you feeling attacked, I guarantee you that your partner might be hurt or afraid of being hurt, that there's something more vulnerable happening inside of them. And that's their way of trying to protect. Same with the withdrawal. So this is all, maybe I should have started off with this slide, but because this is where the rubber hits the road, as the saying goes, when it comes to the logic of emotions. We want to respond to the vulnerable stuff, not the secondary. So what we actually see, how the person is actually expressing their feelings, that's just a window. That's the invitation to engage and be engage more and be curious about what maybe vulnerable feeling you're having. And yes, FYI, depending on the person's background or history, if they feel love or a sense of connection, they might actually flight. They may run away. Again, that's a story for another day. Numb, just really quickly, numb is more seen like in adults. So that's where we have substance use. Like I'm feeling something, I don't want to feel it anymore. So I'm going to distract myself. I'm going to, drink it away. I'm going to work it away. I'm going to do all these things to avoid experiencing these vulnerable feelings by numbing them out. So here's some other more nuanced examples of hurts and fears. So every one of this, like the abandoned, unwanted, disregarded, hopeless, worthless, unlovable, rejected, helpless, inadequate, failure, powerless, um, all of those can be hurts or fears. So if you're experiencing that feeling, that can be the hurt. Or if you're afraid of feeling abandoned, for example, like I don't want to be abandoned, that can still trigger a fight, flight, freeze, or numb response, even if you're not feeling abandoned at the moment. But the fear of being abandoned could be enough to trigger that secondary response. Just my clinical observation, the top three, the abandoned, unwanted, disregarded. I hear women talk more about those. I hear men tend to more inadequate, failure, powerless, or tends to be the more common primary hurts or fears that guys have. And then the middle set, the hopeless, worthless, unlovable, rejected, helpless, that tends to be, I personally have not seen any kind of like um, gender differences there. I also attached the antidote to those. So connected versus abandoned, wanted, regarded versus. So I'm looking at time. We're going to jump ahead. So our goal actually is to go from reactive to engaged and connected slash congruent. So you notice the emotional electricity is still there, but we have an effortful mental processes engaged in the goal. When we talk about being connected or congruent, it's you're able to what people see is what's going on internally, and that's the goal definitely as dads to help kids for us to be congruent and also for our kids to be congruent, especially at the with the more vulnerable primary emotion stuff. So let's talk about the effortful or intentional mental processes here. It takes energy and focus to do this. Compared to our automatic mental processes, it's slow. Um, it slows everything down. It is resource intensive. Your brain will actually, your neurons will be using more glucose. You'll be using more energy. And that's why those of us that have heavy mental oriented jobs, we still go home exhausted. You're using a lot of energy to engage your thinking. Um, and and this is also an intentional process. So we're choosing to engage in this process, and it's often reflective as well. It gives us increased clarity. Where automatic mental processes can be prone to bias and prone to error. When we sometimes we use the phrase "take a step back," that is gives us increased clarity. We're giving it, well, what are some other possible explanations behind the behavior that's going on right now? Or what's some other possible explanations in that interaction I just had? So we actually can get a little bit more accurate or a little bit increased clarity when we engage the intentional processes. And it can lead to, instead of reactivity, it can lead to proactivity if we want to make up a new word. But we can have more deliberate decisions and deliberate actions as a result of engaging this intentional mental process. So, how do we do this? How does this translate to fatherhood? I love the scene. I'm not going to play it, but if you have a chance, there's this great scene in Ted Lasso playing darts. And I think this is just the best quote ever. When it comes to how do we deal with this logic of emotion stuff within ourselves, as well as with kids and even partners, this is the best advice I could ever give. Be curious, not judgmental. So, how do we do that? So, first things first, we need to raise our own emotional IQ. So, emotional intelligence. There is a great book by John Gottman called How to Raise an Emotionally Intelligent Child. Highly, highly, highly recommended. One of the first things, though, is like we need to increase our understanding of emotions and increase our vocabulary a little bit so then we can help others, help our kids. So, ways to be curious. And these are great. These, by the way, these are all questions I might actually ask an adult who's struggling with emotional awareness. Um, and these are also great questions. So you can ask these to yourself. If you're trying to raise your emotional IQ, these are great questions. And these are fantastic questions to ask your kids. So there's a physiological response we talked about with emotions, like where in your body is the feeling? Because kids oftentimes will not be able to name the feeling, but they can tell you where in their body they are feeling it. And so rather than forcing them to talk or label the feeling, we can have them label location. Does it feel light? Is it heavy? Is it pokey, scratchy, sharp? What is, so if we identify where in the body that feeling is, what is that feeling like? Is it tight, heavy, like sharp, like scratchy, irritating? The kids are great at describing that, especially if you can start um, giving them some multiple choice kind of options. Um, you can get into some history. This might give you insight into your child or your own automatic process, the automatic mental process. Is there another time? When is another time you felt this way? Um, there's a Emotions are contextually based. So I could have the feeling of palms sweating a little bit, heart rate goes up, my breathing gets a little bit more shallow. And depending on the context, that could mean nerves. It could also mean excited. Physiologically identical, contextually different. And so how we interpret that makes a difference. And so when is another time you felt this way? It gives you some insight into um, maybe some of the context that yourself have been in or your child has been in. Intentional processes. Um, FYI, this will having this conversation with a child will likely not work if they're really elevated. So if they are like having a hard time breathing, they're kind of like hyperventilating. First things first is you want to get them just get their eye contact and just say, okay, breathe with me. Don't tell them to breathe. Just say, follow me and get that eye contact. And that can help them focus and start to physiologically bring the heart rate down. Then you can start to engage these kind of questions a little bit more. And the questions themselves, along with the breathing, will actually help bring them into the intentional processes, um, and which goes a long way. So, does this feeling have a name? The kids might have a name for it already. Would you like me to help you give it a name? So that's where your vocabulary can come in handy. But when in doubt, you can just stick with the basics. Hurt, afraid, usually not that complicated. Usually one of those two usually is it, or sad, right? That's it doesn't need to be super complicated, but as a child gets older, having more nuance in the words can help communicate that different intensity. So you can ask the kid, your child, like, would you like me to help you give it a name? Um, Also, in this conversation, we all have basic needs and desires. Like, so most of us, when we're hurt because we don't feel safe, or we feel like we've lost connection, or we don't feel like autonomous, like we can do what we want to do. We feel maybe controlled, or we're feeling left out. Those are all normal feelings. So when you're talking with your kid, those are all normal needs. And so when you're talking with your child, it's like, yeah, yeah, it's important. I can see why you would want to be invited to that party. That's really sad. Like, you don't need to sound like the therapist. Sorry, but you can validate that need and that desire that they're hurt or scared of, and then help them identify the appropriate strategy to meet the need for that given context. So I'm looking at the time. Let me go through a couple more slides and we'll open it up for Q&A. So we have be curious, not judgmental. So um, number one thing I see happen with parents, not just dads, parents, moms, dads, adult. Children do not have adult motivations, regardless of how smart they are or how big their vocabulary is. They're, our brains are not fully done developing till age 25. So it's those automatic mental processes are always present, but those intentional, effortful processes are always in development. And there's a lot of adults over 25 who need to work on their effortful mental processes as well. So we can't, you're going to start lower than you, if you have a very bright child with good vocabulary, they still may need help of where in your body are you feeling this? What does it feel like? Does it have a name? Like walking them through it and slowing down. Um, if children are vindictive, it is not the same. It's not the same motivation that an adult would have. So, number one, that don't judge that or assume they have adult motivations. Um, Even littles, like 2-year-olds, um, they are their own person with their own inner world. And this goes back to the be curious, like helping them understand. So what might tick you off might they might feel sad. What they get angry about might be something different than you might get angry about. So that's where that curiosity comes in. Don't assume that they perceive the world the same as you do. Um, and this is true for adults. Sometimes they're not a feeling word that fits the emotional experience perfectly, and that's okay. Um, I will oftentimes, rather than ask kids or even adults to name the feeling, so what are you feeling? I will ask them, what color is it? Which I know is kind of an odd question, but it's, they can most like, I guarantee they can answer that question. It's like, well, if there's not a feeling word, well, it feels red and it's scratchy and I just, my fist go like this. And they can, as long as you're on the same page and they feel like you're on the same page, having a specific word really doesn't matter. And forcing the vocabulary sometimes actually becomes the thing that can trigger reactivity. Yeah, so sometimes words just don't, there's not a word. Um, the other thing too to remember is we as parents will not be around forever, but the memories of how our children felt when they are around us will be. And that's one of the biggest legacies we can leave as parents and definitely as fathers, is if when they are having big emotions, adult size emotions almost, with little bodies with undeveloped brains and minds, them feeling safe and seen and valued will stick with them. the rest of their lives. And it'll give them a chance to know the world's not as scary as it can be. All right. So lead by example. I feel blank sometimes too is a great approach. Um, the lead by example. Some of these are things to say after you kind of like have been curious. So the important thing is to help the child learn to process their emotions, right? Because we're parents, we're their effortful mental processes, we're the auxiliary effortful mental process as they grow up. Um, so giving them that space, being curious about them, and then saying, I feel angry sometimes too, or I feel sad, I feel scared, is incredibly powerful when dads do it. When dads admit that they feel scared, talk about a huge permission slip for a child to feel scared or sad. It's unbelievably powerful. Um, and emotions help me learn about myself and others. Sometimes I feel different emotions at the same time. Like, so I can be scared and sad. I can be sad and a little bit angry. I can, that, modeling for them that you don't have to feel one thing at one time. It can actually be lots of things at the same time. All right. So final section. If I had my way, I would remove the word make from our vocabularies when it comes to emotions. Um, yeah. So these are versions of the sayings I wish we could just eliminate if I had my way. If I had my magic wand, you make me feel blank, or you make me so mad when we're not puppets. Like emotions and feelings are a result of complex processes. No one can make us. It's more of a invitation and a response, not a cause effect. Other people are not responsible for our feelings. That includes especially our kids. So instead, it's that congruence we talked about a little bit earlier. I feel ideally like maybe a primary emotion, like I feel scared when you run out into the street. I'm worried that you're going to get hurt and you mean so much to me. Like, I don't want to see you get hurt. Right. That's the congruency. And you can be really upset. And there's that congruence of like terror. Um, and they will more likely hear it there. Or when blank happens, I feel blank rather than you make like, yeah. Um, So here's some more online resources. The pbs.org/parents. It's an amazing website. Um, the the Kentucky, our state of Kentucky has a great agency. It does have lots of great agencies. Has a great site around child development and developmental milestones for different ages. So talking about what can you expect a child to do mentally in terms of effortful mental processes, that'll kind of give you some insight into what's normative for a 3-year-old, what's normative for like an 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old. And um, you'll see David Weisenhorn's name on that screenshot. The extension publications, there's a lot of great parenting extension publications that are readily available for you all. So that is all I have. Here's my contact info. If y'all have any follow-up questions, and we'll call it good. Do some Q&A.
All right. Do you guys have any questions? Feel free to just unmute yourself and ask the question if you have any. And if you prefer to type in the chat, you can do that as well.
You're welcome, Joe. Hopefully it was helpful.
Zeta, I don't have a question per se, just some comments. I think that what I found was really helpful in what Dr. Wood was sharing. Um, I think it's really important that the message we're talking about is one that I heard him say twice in his presentation today, and that's that we are not our emotions, that they are just oftentimes the way we understand reactions and the way we understand events around us and processing things, and there's real importance to that. Anthony DeMello said that once we turn our attention to our process, that there's a pause, there's a gap between stimuli and response. And the more we're aware of our response, the more we're aware of what's happening, these emotions, the more accurate we can be. Because Dr. Wood said very several times that we are prone to, our emotions are prone to error, that oftentimes there's a lot of error in the way in which we respond. And as an adult, someone who has a lot of information about this, I still respond poorly. Dr. Wood, you know this, Nate. I mean,
Yeah, what's up with the Dr. Wood? Like Nate,
yeah,
dude.
I mean, there's so much of that negative response that I get it wrong, because that immediate response is so innate and so fast that I fail to find the gap in um, that stimulus and response. But the more I'm prone to understanding that my emotions at times are fickle, the more likely I am to pay them less attention and to put the energy towards what is the right response here. And so, Nate, thanks so much for that, because I think it's really important that we do that. And I think it's important that we share that with our children as well. I think one of the faults of where we've been sliding with this emotional talk is that we've ramped it up to where kids believe they are their emotions. And I think that's a dangerous piece too, because then people begin to use their emotions against themselves and say, I'm depressed, I'm this, I'm that. And it's like, now you might be feeling that, but that's not who you are. That's not what you are. And the more we can separate ourselves from our emotions, the more likely we are to get the right response, but also to be able to say, maybe this is an error in my own judgment. I'm going to change this response. I'm going to refuse to feel this way, because there's really no evidence or bounds for me to feel that way, right? Like that's a choice. In some ways we can choose. I love that, Nate, you said, putting a smile on physiologically changes us, right? And so we have real control and mastery of our emotions. And so just adding that, Nate, and I'd love to hear your feedback on that, but I really
Yeah,
appreciate
I think yeah, no, I would say yeah, ditto everything. So thanks again, David, for coming. I'd say like maybe that tip, like when we feel that our own reactivity, the logic of emotion, with especially if it's like one of those defensive responses like anger, withdraw, like I want to fight, I want to run, like or I
it.
just deer in the headlight. Like there's likely one of those primary vulnerable feelings and saying, okay, stepping into, rather than avoiding that anger internally, it's like leaning in. It's like, oh, what is there something I'm afraid of right now? Is
Mm.
there something about this situation that I'm scared of? Is there something that might be hurting? That gives you insight into yourself. And it's like, oh, okay. Then you can choose, like, okay, do I want to express that fear or that hurt right now? Is this the appropriate time and place for that?
Mm-hmm.
Either way, the anger, that defensiveness is usually gone pretty quickly because you're into that vulnerable, you're into your feels, as they might say. My children would just curse me for saying that, but Dad, you're way too old to say
Well,
that.
but I like that. I like what you're talking about, because I think for me, that's the value in being able to go back and say, I'm sorry. Hey, you know, I responded out of anger and out of fear, but really, or I responded angrily. And the reality was I was scared. I was scared for your safety. I was scared for the things that I was fearful of what might have happened. And so I responded this way. And what you saw was dad get mad. But what you didn't realize is that dad was really scared in that moment. And for that, I'm sorry, I chose the wrong emotion, but I'm going to work on that. And so, I mean, just I think giving that to kids and saying, hey, we don't always get it right, but I'm not done with this guy you see every day. I'm still working here. I'm trying to be better, and I'm going to help you. I know sometimes that happens for you. Sometimes you react poorly, or because of fear or anger
Well,
instead.
that's Yeah.
sympathy, you know?
Yeah, it's that lead by example thing. It's like
Exactly.
just in that example you just gave, you're like, oh, there's anger and there's scared. And that's what like you've already like implicitly taught your kid, oh, there's primary and secondary emotions.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, and leading with like, oh, here's how to say I'm sorry. Like if mom and dad or parent or teacher can say, you know what, I made a mistake. Here's how I'm working. Like, yeah, I mean that we're jumping ahead to the next couple of workshops actually. So this is like perfect conversation leading us. Yeah. So David, we
A
gotta put
teaser, man. That's a teaser. But I wanted to give that to Mark and John, the men that are still here that are listening. It's like, it's not about the perfection. It's about recognizing the work oftentimes of, I think, doing that. And I didn't write down what you were talking about. It was the intentional processing or something. It
yeah.
is that piece that takes, I love it. You said it takes energy. It takes, you can exhaust yourself doing it. And it's oftentimes it's not as fast as we want it to be. We still make a lot of those mistakes, but being able to then, once you recognize it, acknowledging it, and then taking a little bit of that slice of humble pie and going back and just acknowledging like, hey, I missed the mark here. And I do that with my wife. Hey, I missed the mark. I shouldn't have responded to you that way. I know that was meaningful for you. And I probably just shut that down because I didn't really want to put the effort in, the energy into like processing that with you. Like, I don't know.
Uh, and as
Value.
you all can tell, Dave works out. I do not. But like, like you're talking about the effortful processing. I think about weightlifting is such a great metaphor because if you're not used to doing it at first, it feels really heavy. It
Oh,
feels
yeah.
like it takes a lot of energy. And over time, it gets quicker, it gets easier, not because the load is less, but you're just stronger
Mm,
because you're doing that effortful, intense work. And just, yeah, it's easier because you're stronger emotionally and be able to understand. And it gets, what's nice is those automatic processes we talked about. With enough time and practice, those effortful mental processes can ease their way into the automatic process.
love that.
And your automatic process then becomes like anger, then almost instantly like, oh, scared. Like
Yeah.
it becomes quick. Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah,
Thanks,
I
Mark.
think that,
We'll see you.
slow to, I mean, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. I mean, those are the things that we're talking about, right? That's that audit, because that is the automated process. It's to fire fast and to slow that down. You get a chance to do those things. And I appreciate, but I understand. And it's funny because you used that analogy of working out. There's soreness is what I was thinking. I was like, man, you know how
Yeah.
sore you are?
That's
Like
why I don't work out.
I
I
feel
don't
that
like that.
level of soreness though when I misstep, right? Like when I
No,
mess that up, when I do the wrong thing and I have to go back and apologize, that soreness is, I mean, it's a resistance, right? I don't want to do that. It's embarrassing. I feel a slight bit of shame involved in that. And I think that relates well to that soreness that you feel. It's just a process of getting it right. It's a process of working that out, and that soreness is going to come. You eating that pie is going to be part of it, and then hopefully, the more you do it, the less pie you have to eat.
that's right. The
Man, I
humble
just
pie.
appreciate you, Nate. I do. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for what you shared today. It was really good.
Let's chat. Well, let's. I think like I think this almost the banter here at the end. I think is probably just as powerful as like the presentation. So I think. So Zeta, if that's okay with you, I'm wondering about the next few, almost having like a round table-y kind of like have our topic and then have like a round table discussion like this where other folks on the Zoom can like hop in and ask questions and like
I think
I
that's a
think
great idea.
Yeah, I like that.
if you